Library computer, data being received. Working.
Fascinating. You're in the hands of an adolescent.
Hi, welcome to Books Worth Reading. This is my reading report for the first week or so of February 2026. I got 4 books finished in this time, and that's a little bit slow for me sometimes, but every once in a while, real life gets in the way of the important things in life, which is, of course, reading books. Well, let's just jump in and get started. Sails on the Horizon, a novel of the Napoleonic Wars by J. Worrall. I saw this kind of randomly at the library. I went by to check out something that my wife had on hold, and they had this on a display along with a number of other war-themed books and the sequel to this, Any Approaching Enemy. So I checked out this one, and I did enjoy it enough. I had, an issue with it that I'll discuss in a moment, but I did enjoy it enough to where I have checked out the sequel, and we'll be reading that soon. So this one begins in 1797, and its main character is a young second lieutenant named Charles Edgemont. And he finds himself in command of a ship when the captain and the first lieutenant are killed in battle. This in turn results in a promotion and command of a small frigate. And that, in turn, leads to a series of adventures fighting the French and the Spanish, including 2 brutal battles against a larger Spanish frigate. The novel's obviously inspired by C.S. Forester's Hornblower books, and a young Hornblower actually has a fun cameo in the book. Edgemont's a strong and likable protagonist. He's a clever tactician, he's a good leader, he cares about his men, and the battle scenes are quite good. My nitpick with the book involves how much time Edgemont spends ashore in England in between his actions at sea. While he's in England, he meets a Quaker woman who disapproves of his profession as a warrior. The 2 fall in love despite this, and there's a will they, won't they get married subplot. Now, it is well written, and the girl's a good character in her own right, and the author injects a fair amount of humor into the situation to keep it from being just pure soap opera type melodrama. But gee whiz, it takes up so much of the book. We come to a book like this expecting cannonballs crashing into ships. We expect gunpowder smoke blowing in the wind and blood in the scuppers and life or death decisions to be made. Hornblower, for instance, got engaged in the last chapter of one book, married in the first chapter of the next book, and then barely ever sees his wife again because he's at sea fighting the French. This is where Edgemont needs to be. I like his Quaker gal, but I'm here for the cannon fire. The heck with romance. And I do want to be fair, the romance plot is well written. And the characters act believably, and everything is nicely balanced with drama and humor. Another fan of Napoleonic naval fiction might have no problem with it at all. But for me, I often found myself wishing that Edgemont would just tell the girl he hasn't got time for her, get back to sea, and fight the Spanish where he belongs. Marvel Masterworks, The Rawhide Kid, Volume 1. Now, Johnny Bart, a.k.a. The Rawhide Kid, debuted in The Rawhide Kid number 17 in 1960, and that's where this Masterworks picks up. And it covers, I think, the first 9 issues. Now, he didn't get an issue number 1 because the book picked up the numbering of an earlier series, which had featured a different character called the Rawhide Kid. That had been canceled in 57 or 58, and they just picked up they reused the name and picked up the same numbering. This newer kid is raised by his Uncle Ben, who taught him how to use a gun. And when his uncle is murdered by outlaws, the kid takes action. Circumstances lead most people to believe he's also an outlaw, so he's generally greeted with fear and suspicion whenever he arrives in a new town. And the Rawhide Kid is an interesting character. He's always a little bit angry, because life has treated him unfairly, and his small stature means people often underestimate his fighting ability, either with guns or with fists. But even though he's perpetually grouchy, he does have chronic hero syndrome. If you're in trouble, he'll help you. Written by Stan Lee and drawn by Jack Kirby, these stories look great. It's Kirby art, so that goes without saying. Especially the action scenes, which are just a whole lot of fun. And the stories move along at a fast pace. Most of them rely on standard Western tropes, but Stan and Jack are willing to get a little far out sometimes. There's one story where the kid goes up against an alien shaped like a totem pole. In another, he chases a masked outlaw called the Bat, a villain who would not have been out of place in the superhero comics that Stan and Jack would soon be creating. Now, it's fun to point out that the kid was put on his heroic path after the murder of his Uncle Ben. A few years later, the same thing happened to Spider-Man when his Uncle Ben was killed. Stan Lee was famous for having a poor memory, so the repeat of the name and the theme is probably a coincidence. All the same, if you live in the Marvel Universe and you have an Uncle Ben, maybe hire him a personal bodyguard. The best work of Stan and Jack was still a year or two away with the creation of the Fantastic Four. But if you're in the mood for largely traditional Western tales with an occasional dose of oddly shaped aliens, you'll enjoy this run of the Rawhide Kid. Next, I finished Timeslip, the Time Tunnel Adventure #2 by Murray Leinster. Now, I have been reading media tie-in novels that I found available in EPUB format, electronic format on the Internet Archive. I've been reading, one each from the various series I have in alphabetical order on my Serial app on my phone. That's an app that sends me like one chapter a day, and I just have fun with that cliffhanger mentality, reading one chapter a day of each of these. I do a Doctor Who, then I do a Man from U.N.C.L.E., then a Marvel Superheroes, a series of novels featuring the Marvel superheroes from the late 70s. I do Planet of the Apes. I have already finished the movie adaptations, and now I'm doing the adaptations from the television series. Then I do Thunderbirds, and then there were a couple of Time Tunnel tie-in novels that I found. This is the second one. I read the first one a few months ago. I was also doing some early Star Trek novels from when they were published by Bantam Books very early on. Novels that went out of print when another publisher took over the series and may never see print again. But fortunately, they're sometimes accessible on sites like the Internet Archive, and it was fun to reread those again. Anyway, Timeslip. This is Leinster's second and final time tunnel tie-in novel. It continues with the alternate continuity established in his first book. Doug and Tony are back in the present rather than permanently time lost as they were in the TV series, with the tunnel having reliable control over sending people or items to specific times in the past and bringing them back as long as they're equipped with a time harness. The tunnel, in the beginning of the book, the tunnel is being used to secretly transport a nuclear missile. The idea is to send it into the past, move it to where it needs to be, then bring it back to the present. There's no chance of the Russians detecting that it had been moved. But a general overseeing this task doesn't really believe time travel is possible. He does something stupid, and the missile ends up crashing in a pond behind a cathedral in Mexico City in 1947, right smack in the middle of the Mexican War. So if left alone, it'll eventually be discovered in the present because the cathedral's currently being remodeled or repaired, and they're digging up in the area where the pond is, where the missile has been for the past 100+ years. So they're going to find it and perhaps inadvertently detonate the fuel. And even if it's found without being detonated, this is going to cause all sorts of diplomatic kerfuffles. It's going to look like the U.S. is just sneaking nukes into random places. So Tony and another character named Sam Crichton go back in time with uniforms and papers identifying them as part of the American Army, which was invading Mexico at the time. They need to find the missile and get a new time harness on it so it can be brought back to the present. Now, why send a new character rather than Doug Phillips, one of the usual protagonists from the series? Doug stays back in the time tunnel complex, helping from there. This is because the action of the time travelers lead to the death of Sam Crichton's great-great-grandfather. Now, Sam's great-grandfather has already been born, so that's no problem. There's not going to be the traditional grandfather paradox. But the dead man was historically supposed to perform several brave deeds before getting killed in Mexico City. So now Sam and Doug must replicate those deeds in addition to recovering the nuke, and there's a chance that Sam might need to die in his ancestor's place in order to preserve history. If Doug were in this role, or Tony, the readers would know he would somehow come out of it because they're the regular characters. But Sam, for all we know, might very well get killed. Because he's not a character taken from the TV series, he's definitely a potential red shirt. Now, this is a fun story. I don't think it's quite as good as the first one, because Leinster spends a little too much time techno-babbling explanations of time travel and the consequences of it and all of that. But that's a minor glitch. There's some really good action scenes and some poignant character moments. I like that the general who messed up at the beginning is not presented as just a buffoon, but someone who realizes he messes up, takes responsibility for it, and helps out as much as he can after that. I especially like a scene in which Tony wrestles with the moral implications of fighting and killing enemies in a war that, from his normal perspective, happened over a century ago against a nation he now considers friendly. Leinster also gives mini history lessons about the Mexican War, but I think this helps establish the time and the place rather than slow up the story. Leinster might have known this was his last tie-in novel for the series, because he wraps things up with plans for how the tunnel can be used for secret communications and transportation. Though Tony does use the novel's last paragraph to mention that we still don't know if the past can be changed, and if it can, how this would affect the future. So there's room for future adventures, even without two time-lost scientists unable to get home. The novel reminds me of an interview with Robert Colbert, the actor who played Doug, and this interview's on the DVD set. He said that had the show been given a second season, he would have liked to see Doug and Tony come home and then be sent out on specific missions into the past. Leinster takes his tie-in novel in a similar direction, and he shows it would have been a perfectly good premise for the show. Next, Kingfisher Road by Shepard Rifkin. This was a really strong Western. The main character is Tom Carson, and he makes an enemy of King Fisher, the biggest rancher in southern Texas, when he's forced to kill a relative of Fisher's in self-defense. Carson is captured, but when Fisher is impressed with his courage, the rancher stops a lynching at the last moment, and he gives Carson a job. Fisher runs a tight ship on his ranch, but he's maybe a little nuts. He misses the old days of fighting for his ranch, when he had to fight rival ranchers and Comanches and Apaches and such, and he wants to help Carson become successful just so that he can have a rival who can put up a good fight. He sends Carson on a job with two other men, and instructions for those two men to kill Carson. It's a test to see how good Carson is. And, well, he is good. Carson can handle himself in a fight, and he can make intelligent plans to outwit opponents. Over the course of the book, he doesn't just survive that assassination attempt, but he completes several dangerous jobs for Fisher. Along the way, he makes an enemy of a Mexican bandit leader, and he makes enemies of two of Fisher's brutish relatives. He also has a close call with a war party of Comanches, and he meets a beautiful Mexican woman who wants to marry him, and King Fisher gets the hots for as well. When the novel comes to its climax, there's a wild, brutal shootout in which people are being betrayed, and some of those involved are switching sides at unexpected moments. Kingfisher's Road is indeed a very entertaining Western with a number of unexpected twists to it. And that's it. That's what I've read so far this month. I am currently reading John Scalzi's Old Man's War, a science fiction novel. I've had Scalzi's novels, both this one and most especially Red Shirts, recommended to me by several people, and I thought, well, I finally got to read one of them. And I've started with Old Man's War, and I'm enjoying it so far. I'll have a reading report on that next time I do a reading report video. And on my serial app, having finished The Time Tunnel, and that's the last Time Tunnel novel, I've jumped around back to Doctor Who again, and I've finished reading the novelizations of the last season of the Third Doctor, played by John Pertwee, And I'm starting on the first Tom Baker story, Doctor Who and the Giant Robot. I've read before, and it's a fun story, and I plan to enjoy it. And my serial reader divided that up into 11 parts. I read the first one today, so 10 more days to get this finished. Once again, there's absolutely no logical reason to be reading these tie-in novels via my serial reader. I just enjoy doing it that way. It's just fun for me. I have no idea why. I can't even explain it. I'm almost done with the Thunderbirds. I've only got 2 of them, and only 1 in Planet of the Apes, and only 2 of the Marvel superhero novels. So pretty soon I'll be down to Doctor Who and Man from U.N.C.L.E. I think I've still got 13 or 14 Man from U.N.C.L.E. novels to read through. So soon we'll be just going back and forth between those 2 for a while. When I finish Man from U.N.C.L.E., which will happen before I run out of Doctor Who, I might start mixing in Doctor Who with the public domain classics that are built into the serial reader. I don't have to sideload them in. Who knows what I'll do? But I always enjoy having something going by the serial reader just because I enjoy that. And so that's it for now. As always, thank you for listening. I continue to have just a few readers, but I know from the likes and comments I'm getting that the few readers I have, a few listeners, I guess I should say, the few listeners I have do seem to enjoy these and enjoy the books I'm sharing. So just remember that my remarkable good taste in books is really the only hope that Western civilization has for survival. And make sure everybody else knows that as well. Like and subscribe. And thank you again for listening.